It had been months since the Reynolds family moved into their new home. The house, nestled in the small town of Haven Hill, was a charming two-story structure built in the 1920s. The paint was peeling in places, and the yard had overgrown with wild grass. But the price was right. The real estate agent, Mrs. Carmichael, had assured them it was a steal. At first, everything seemed perfect. The house had character, creaky floors, large windows that let in the morning sun, and a fireplace. That crackled to life on the cold nights. The family, a mother and father with 2 children, settled in quickly, eager for a fresh start. However, by the end of the first week, they began noticing small things. At night, the house seemed to groan, the walls emitting faint whispers that no one could quite understand. The children, 8-year-old Lily and 12-year-old Max, spoke of strange sounds from the attic, something scurrying, tapping against the floorboards. One evening, as Lily sat at the kitchen table drawing, she stopped. Suddenly, her crayon hovering above the paper. "Mom, who is that?" she whispered, pointing to the dark hallway. Her mother, Grace, turned to follow her gaze but saw nothing. "There's no one, sweetie. Go finish your drawing." But Lily was insistent. "I saw him. He was standing there, looking at me." Grace tried to laugh it off, assuming it was just a child's overactive imagination. Max, however, had been hearing things too. He'd heard footsteps pacing around the house at odd hours. He even swore he saw a figure standing in the hallway one night, just as the clock struck midnight. But when he blinked, it was gone. The next few days were strange. The house seemed colder, even though the heat was running and the smell of old wood and dust grew thicker. Every time Grace walked past the attic door, it felt as though someone was watching her. She started locking the door before bed, but every morning it was open again. It was the same with the back door leading to the garden. Despite checking it every night, it would always be ajar. One evening, while the family was having dinner, the power flickered and then cut out completely. The house plunged into darkness. Grace grabbed the flashlight, and as she made her way down the hallway to check the fuse box, she heard it. A voice, faint but unmistakable. It was a whisper, low and guttural. "Leave this place, or else." Grace froze. She turned, expecting to see one of the children, but the hallway was empty. Panic rose in her chest as she hurried back to the dining room. Her hands shook as she picked up the phone, dialing the local electrician, but there was no answer. Then, the power blinked. Back on it that night, after putting the kids to bed, Grace couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, listening to the sounds of the house, the groan of the wood, the wind rattling the windows. But then she heard something else, a slow, deliberate scratching coming from upstairs. Heart pounding, she crept up the stairs, her feet whispering on the old hardwood. As she reached the top, she felt the air grow colder. The attic door was open again. She stepped inside, the beam from her flashlight sweeping the room. There, in the far corner of the attic, sat a dusty, old rocking chair. It rocked slowly back and forth, creaking with every motion. Grace's breath caught in her throat. And then there was the figure, a tall, thin man with hollow eyes and a crooked smile, standing motionless in the shadows, staring at her. He didn't move, but Grace could feel his presence. The temperature in the room dropped dramatically, and she could see her breath fogging in front of her. In a rush of terror, she turned and bolted down the stairs, slamming the attic door shut behind her. But the house was different now. It felt heavier, darker, as though it had just awakened. The air seemed thick, suffocating. The next morning, Grace called a local historian, hoping to uncover some answers. The historian told her that the house had once belonged to a man named James Wentworth, a reclusive war veteran who had lived there alone for years. People in town whispered that he had suffered from PTSD and had been a very disturbed man. No one knew what had happened to him, but the house had been abandoned for over a decade after he mysteriously disappeared. Grace felt a chill run down her spine as the historian continued. Some say he never truly left, that his spirit still haunts that house. Desperate, Grace researched the history further. She discovered that James Wentworth had been found dead in the attic, his body curled in the same position as the rocking chair. The coroner's report had concluded that he died from malnutrition, though there was no sign of a struggle. It seemed that Wentworth's restless spirit was still bound to the house, cursing anyone who dared to call it home. Terrified, Grace gathered her family and decided they would leave, but when they tried to pack, they found the doors wouldn't open. The windows wouldn't budge. The walls seemed to close in around them. It was then that they heard it again. The slow, deliberate scratching. This time it was coming from inside the walls. The whispers grew louder, frantic. "Leave now, or you will never escape." In a panic, Grace grabbed the children and ran through the house, trying every door, every window. But it was no use, they were trapped. And then from the attic they heard the creaking of the rocking chair. It was rocking again in the silence of the night, waiting for them. The next morning, the house on Haven Hill stood still, empty. The Reynolds family was never seen again. The house remained, as it always had, in the small town of Haven Hill. The neighbors would often hear strange noises, whispers, footsteps, and the faint sound of a rocking chair creaking in the distance. And every once in a while, a new family would move in, eager to start fresh. But none of them would last long. House on Haven Hill had its own way of keeping people there, and it was always waiting for its next victim.